Good afternoon. I hope everyone's doing well. Can you guys hear me clearly? Cool. Forgive me if I'm a little edgy. This is my first time. It's been a while, and yeah. So I'm trying to convey my learnings. Uh, it's about deconstructing classics. When I mean classics, I'm talking about the OGs, the vanilla games, the first generation games, and what we can learn from them, and how we can apply those learnings while we make our games. I'm Christopher, and I'm currently the CEO at NextWave Multimedia. I've been here for like 3 months. All this while I was a designer. So one thing that I came across recently was this quote that, we are not makers of history, we are made by history. That's pretty true as far as if you look back at your experience and everything you've been through and how it defines you. So I'm a 90s kid. Like most of my pop culture and my formative years were influenced by the entertainment I was exposed to. Whereas if you look at the US around the same time, you can see like all the pop culture that they were influenced by, right? Like, whereas if you're lucky, you can spot like a Mario game there. There is barely anything as far as gaming is concerned, right? Whereas for them, you can see it's like all over the place, right? You got like Nintendos, your Segas, and whatnot. Then the summer of 2000 changed a lot. Like we got access to internet and CDs, so we could pirate games because that's all we could do. Couldn't buy games, and I was able to like carry my games and share it with my friends, and we used to take it to these internet cafes, play a lot of games, and we started like playing more competitive games. Like there was Quake 3, there was Unreal Tournament, um, Soldier of Fortune, Carmageddon, and before you know it, it like got really hot. Like a lot of people took interest. Kids would drop out of college and school and come and start playing with us. And I was doing this without studying. I wasn't going to college. My dad like sort of kicked me out. So, and I had to figure out like how can I make a living out of this. So in 2003, I happened to like cross paths with this marketing guy from Reliance, and they were setting up Reliance web stores across India. They had like about 6,000 PCs in the domain, and for them, they wanted like internet and multiplayer gaming as one of their offerings. So I got my break in the gaming industry with esports. I pulled off India's first nationwide esports event along with Microsoft. It was for Halo, and we launched it across India. It was televised by 10 Sports, and I did that and a couple of other events for about 2 years. The market was again like too niche. It was too tiny. It wasn't expanding at the rate at which we wanted it to grow. Barrier to entry was very high. You need to have access to a PC, and if you have an access to a PC at home, I don't think you're going to be playing games. So you may have to go to a cafe, and if you go to a cafe, you have to pay a premium. So the market didn't grow, and I was just like I couldn't like wait over there. I got restless. So I jumped on to like graphic design, and I did that for about 5 years, from 2005 to 2009. But after I made my money, I was like, this is not where my heart is. I have to go back to gaming. So I enrolled myself at the Vancouver Film School in Canada in 2009. In 2010, I graduated with the Best Student Project. And in 2011, that also got nominated at the Canadian Video Game Awards for the Best Student Project for that year. So that was the beginning of my like, okay, wow, we can do something with gaming here. Maybe if not in India, at least over here. But I didn't get a work permit, so I had to come back to India. And I worked at a couple of startups. And in 2012, I landed a gig at the studio called BitRhymes. They were making this game called Bingo Bash. It was a vanilla bingo experience, and they wanted me to like transform that experience and make it like a very fresh bingo experience. I'll get to that later in the slides. I was there between 2012 to 2017. During that time, like the game on a bad day would make about 70K dollars. It got acquired in 2014 for about 200 mil, still the biggest acquisition story in India. And I think in the previous panel they were talking about, we need like these big games. These big games have been made. We just have to like follow up. And after 2017, I took a break. I was just pondering like, what do I do next? Because I checked off all my boxes. But I felt like, okay, irrespective of what, irrespective of how comfortable I get in life, I still want to keep making games. So in 2019, I went back to Canada, tried to get a job there, joined a studio called Ludia. I was working in the Jurassic World franchise. I was the lead game designer. But then COVID happened, 2020, I had to come back. I joined Glue. I was also interviewing at EA. I said no to EA, but then EA bought Glue, so I ended up working for EA. And I was there for 2 years. But in this time, like you can see, like there are two phases of my life. Like there's pre-game design and there's post-game design, and now there's next wave. I'm the CEO here. They wanted to take a bet with someone who's been in design to lead this studio, and I hope I'm the right guy. Let's see, time will tell. So the Indian gaming history, right? Irregular stats. I'm just going to jump here because you all can go to Google and figure this out. But one thing to take away from this is like we got like the largest base of players, and that's a big deal because I'll get to why it matters. So what is the problem statement, right? I'm trying to break it down in the context of risks. So I don't know if you have done this exercise before. The known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. Have you all? No? Okay. So a known known is for certain we know. We know this for certain, right? So what is for certain? We play a lot of games, for sure, right? We're consumers of games. What is also certain is we can make high quality games, right? Like this has been proven. I think for over like 10 plus years, EA has been operating out of India. We have like Ubisoft and a couple of other studios, and we also have like Next Wave and other studios too, like Dream 11 and whatnot. Like we all make high quality games. What is a known unknown? It's like we know something, but there's a big chunk also we don't know. We know that we don't know something. So what is that? Can we get better at designing successful games? I think this is hit or miss. Like we tend to study other games. We tend to like come up with some ideas and then do some prototyping, and it's like a hit or miss. But is there a process? How can we arrive at getting better at designing games? Hopefully, at the end of this exercise, you should have like at least 2 takeaways which can help you with that. And an unknown unknown, like we don't know that we don't know. So will we build the next Nintendo out of India? God knows. Let's see. So just a little more context, right? In terms of video game history, just by console generations, if you look at this, we are at the 9th generation right now. And India got its first dose of gaming like only in 2000. I don't know why the emoji hasn't loaded up, but that was India's flag over there. I don't know why. So yeah, we enter the chat over there in 2000. In 2000, we just got a dose of what it is to like play on a PC, what it is to play on a console, and we are already 5 generations behind them. For 5 generations, the West has had so much of information to borrow from, domain knowledge to borrow from, subject matters to like learn from, and we just started playing games in 2000, like on a larger scale. But it's only up until 2020 did we go like mainstream. When I say mainstream, I'm talking about tier 2 cities having more players than tier 1 cities. So that's at the cusp of the 9th generation. So literally 8 generations behind before this becomes like before this became dominant as part of a pop culture. So we have to like do an extra bit more to catch up with the West to make games of their quality and their caliber. But how do we go about doing that? So quick survey here. How many of you all over here do design, game design? Show of hands. Okay. How many do product? Okay. Engineering, tech, okay. Art, okay, that's a good distribution. QA, QC, okay. All of the above, these are indies. Okay. None of the above. Okay, those are corporates. Thank God. Okay. Moving ahead. So you need to get your fundamentals straight, right? Like any game, if you like dissect it, right, comes down to loops. It's just feedback loops. And I use this acronym ATARI. I keep the A silent. But T stands for the trigger, which is the challenge that you're faced with. A stands for the action you need to perform to overcome that challenge. R is the reward, which you get for overcoming that challenge. And I is the investment. How do you use that reward to get better? So that's how you like skill up, you scale up, right? And all of these loops are nested loops. They don't exist independently, like one feeds into the other. So I'll start with the smallest one. This is the compulsion loop, right? Like I think everyone's heard about it, but I just want to like talk about it just in the interest of getting everybody on the same page. The compulsion loop is the smallest loop. It's the moment to moment loop. It is like significant to the game experience. The shorter, the smaller, the tighter the compulsion loop, the more addictive and the more catchy a game gets. So here I'll use Candy Crush as reference because I'm guessing everybody is familiar with Candy Crush. It's also a simple mechanic. So what is the trigger over here? The trigger is, the challenge is, hey, you've got to swap these candy to make a match 3. And what is the action? Literally a gesture, right? So that's your trigger and the action. But what do I get as a reward? I don't know if you guys can see, it's behind the podium. You get like your score bar, right? Like the score keeps going up. So as a consequence of overcoming the challenge, right, you get these rewards, and these rewards over time stack up, and it helps you close this loop, which probably fills up this bar, and then you're done with the level. So that is your smallest compulsion loop. This in turn feeds into like a bigger loop, right, like your short-term loops. So this is where the score kind of affects the rating that you get, right? And the rating now can determine whether like you got 1 stars, 2 stars, or 3 stars, which again like feeds into like other loops. And this primarily drives motivation. This feeds into your midterm loops, and this is primarily designed for like sorry if I missed that. Yeah, it's delayed gratification, right? Like here it's the opposite of instant gratification. Here you're like pushing players to like invest more time and probably like clear more levels, get as many ratings as possible across the journey through the map. And here you can also like affect the difficulty curve and the progression of the game, and this is the meta game. So this is also very important when you're like designing your pacing and difficulty curve of your game. Now as this kind of expands and closes, you feed into the largest loop, which is your long-term loop, and this is the end game. This is where players are at a state of bliss. This is like where you have to like get them to like come into the game without having to push them, because it's becoming a part of their psychological habits. But in the context of Candy Crush, this is like access towards the end of the game where you can participate in the map, you can participate in the event, you can go wherever you want, and people still do come back even though they have like completed all the content. There's still something in it for them. So the reason why I want to bring this up again is, if we don't get our loops right, you're not going to get a very sticky game. If you're not able to measure what the player is doing from moment to moment, you cannot expect them to play the game for your D1, for your D3, for your D7, let alone D30 seconds. So you have to like make sure that your your core loops and all your short-term, mid-term, and long-term loops are tightly nested with each other and how they feed into each other. Now moving on from here, like how do you deconstruct? Okay, I've got a fair understanding of what these loops are, but if I want to like learn about a game, if I want to know what made a certain game very successful, how do I deconstruct it? So I go with this approach. I start with the first layer on top, which is your input-output systems, right? This is your UI, your HUD, your controls, and your user experience, because these are the first things that the player interacts with. And by virtue of just interacting with it, right, you see many things affect its interaction, which then you go into the second layer. So this, where as you're interacting with the UI and whatnot, you're interfacing with the mechanics, the subsystems, and the compulsion loops, right? This is very important. This is where you start taking notes, right? You have to start taking notes and drawing like some form of a map. Okay, if I touch this thing, this happens, and this affects something else. So start drawing a map as you're doing this exercise. And as you go deeper, right, those start feeding into your core game systems and all your engagement loops. So now you will see like, hey, okay, I had a scoring system. Scoring system is now affecting a rating system, and now the rating system is affecting my progression. And again, in the context of Candy Crush, you can also keep this at the back of your mind. This may not necessarily be applicable 1:1 to your game, but it can definitely be, like you can like take parts of it and apply it to your experience that you're planning to create. And as you go deeper, right, then you touch the more like non-explicit or implicit things about the game. This is mostly your game economy and all your game systems values, right? So a game economy is very hard to figure out in the beginning, like why is a certain thing priced at so much, why is there a certain ratio between the primary and secondary currency, so on and so forth. But only if you go through this approach will you arrive at, okay, this is why they do it and this is why it makes sense now. And as you keep going deeper, you finally land at something like this. You have to create like a diagram which becomes your systems diagram. Your systems diagram is literally the blueprint of your game. This is your like your skeletal framework. But the skeletal framework is nothing if you don't have a feedback loop accompanied with it, because the feedback loop is the one that is talking to the skeleton, and then it's like keeping players engaged and motivated. So what is the outcome out of this, right? If you do this, you should clearly be able to have a complete end-to-end flow diagram, a loop diagram, and along with a systems diagram. And this may not come easy the first time you try, but you got to keep trying it. You can take even the most simplest game, like take a Pac-Man, take a Mario, and start dissecting it. If you arrive at the systems, you're sorted. Then the sooner you arrive at systems, the better you'll be able to apply it within your games. Now, why am I ranting about all of this? Because this actually helped me and I've used this. So this was like the state of bingo in 2003, no 2013. And I don't know if you know bingo as a game, it's very simple, right? For 200 years, it hasn't been disrupted. Like it's a simple 5x5 game. You have like 50 numbers allocated for each column, and randomly 5 numbers are picked per column, and they're populated. And numbers are being called out, and you have to use the letters for reference, and you just keep tapping those numbers. You form a pattern, and you call a bingo, and that's the end of the game. So this was the game that they wanted me to reinvent. So I was like, okay, I got to go figure out how to play this game and why this game is fun. And I did the same exercise. I went through all the feedback loops, and then I deconstructed the entire game in terms of its systems. And then I was like, okay, let me try and apply this. But what do I apply? So this is where I went back to all the classic games that I had played, like all your Solitaire, your Bejeweled, your Dig Dug. I don't know if you heard of Dig Dug, but these are all classic games I grew up playing on the PC. And over the next 4 to 5 years, these were all the mechanics that we created. So starting with the first one, the Lucky UC array, that was the first mechanic that we put out. And this was in early 2013. And that kick-started this whole craze of reinventing bingo. So at one point, we had like 40 different mechanics to play bingo. We got like, it's still doing good. I think last year, 2 years ago, who is it? Scopely picked up GSN for about $1 billion. And now Scopely got picked up by $4 billion by Endeavor, I guess. And this game over its lifespan, when I was there, made about 500 mil. It's not the best of graphics, but we got like a very compelling game. We were able to disrupt a traditional game of bingo which hadn't been changed in 200 years. And we did this all in India. Like we didn't have to rely on anybody from outside to tell us how to go do this. But we just did it diligently. We did our homework. There's match 3, there's solitaire, there's poker, there's like, there's a zombie game as well somewhere, there's a match 2, there's dice, there's movement of liquid. So, and people are still trying to figure this out. Like not many studios have had the same success as GSN, with bingo. And if this can be applied to bingo, it can be applied to any game. But in order to apply it to any game, you need to figure out the fundamentals of the game. If you do not understand the fundamentals, if you cannot dissect a game, if you cannot figure out why a game is fun, I don't think you'll be able to like make a very successful game. You can try and copy other games, but you will not understand why the other game was fun. You need to understand why your game, your experience is fun, or figure out that, at least understand why somebody else's game is fun, and maybe there's something in it for you to learn and apply. So this has been my journey, guys, and I'm here to like probably work with some of the most talented people at Next Wave. I've started newly. These guys are very like they push me a lot. They are very how do I say? They're seasoned, and they're like the industry leaders in the cricket simulation space. And I want to bring a different perspective and see if we can cross-pollinate. So that's my journey, and I think I'm good on time. So if you have any questions, I could take them now.
So hi sir, I'm Sam.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
So from the game design perspective, if we look at the entire world and the trends that go today, from TikTok to Instagram Reels, you can see that the human race as a whole, our attention span has gone significantly lower, to a point where Final Fantasy, which is one of the biggest turn-based RPGs, is now an action RPG. So how do you think a game designer should approach this fact, and how it obstructs our way of thinking?
What is the game you want to make? I think that should be the question. If you believe that your game is really fun and engaging and it's tight as an experience, don't worry about how long it takes to play. If you can get lost in that game playing for hours, and if you can give it to others to also play test, and if you see them doing the same, then I think you have a fun game. Don't worry about the time. Just make a fun game. You believe in it. If you don't believe in it, you're not going to be able to sell it. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. And another question that I'd ask is, to start out as a game designer, where do we start? Do we start in the programming side, or like what can
you don't have to start anywhere. Like you can start right now. When I know, like, okay, formally for me, I graduated from a game design college, so it helped me. But I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and they come from different aspects. They've been content writers, they've been programmers, they've been producers. You just need to have a curious mind, and you need to understand how things fall in place.
I've seen a lot of people make game design as the second or third step in the journey. Has it ever been someone's first? And if so, how can it be their first?
For me, it was sort of first. So I did esports and then I jumped to game design. But to each his own, I guess. So you got to figure out like there's nothing wrong in starting elsewhere and landing in design, or there's nothing wrong in starting in design and ending somewhere else. But start somewhere and be passionate, be irrationally obsessive about it. If you're not going to be irrationally obsessive about anything, you're not going to like achieve anything. You will only be a follower. So you have to do things that others don't do. You have to not just because if you're willing to put in the effort, everyone's willing to put in the effort. But irrational obsession like is counterproductive. It's counterintuitive. Like you'll do things that are self-destructive, and people don't want to do that. So if you do that, it works for you. I used to put 14 hours plus to crack a bingo mechanic, and it paid off. It paid off for everybody at the studio. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you, sir.